To me, every 4 years, the GOP wastes their time doing their primary circuit, going through all those debates, going through that process to find a nominee. Because we know what the grand old party looks for in a candidate. We know what they're going to find. We know what they're going to want. Typically throughout their history, this is true. They're looking for a God-loving, gun-toting, white male, over 60 years of age, that's either from money, has money, and is for money, usually has bad hair, is at the minimum borderline racist or perhaps even more, somebody that is very pro big business and the oil companies, very pro tax cuts for the upper income levels and for corporations utilizing the Lafleur supply side economic model, somebody that is very hawkish and very pro on increasing military and defense spending, somebody that now, of course, would be anti-Obama, to the point of being somebody that is a part of the birther movement, if you will, but also out of touch with modern America, who has a narrow scope in terms of their views and has a narrow type of appeal that doesn't sit there and reach out and bring others under the umbrella or underneath the GOP tent. It basically puts up a wall and says, if you don't believe in this, the hell with you. Hates other ideas, yet brings no real good ideas to the table himself. That's pretty much what you look for every 4 years out of a GOP candidate, isn't it? While Bush wasn't exactly 60 plus when he was running, starting in 2000 again in 2004, pretty much everything else he fits the mold. McCain in 2008 most certainly fit the mold, especially from the out of touch and old standpoint, and Romney similarly in 2012. So you look at this 2016 presidential campaign on the Republican side, and you sit there and you look at the candidates that could end up being the nominee, who are the outliers, who are the jokes, who are the somewhat serious candidates, the semi-serious candidates, and then who are the major players, who are the guys that actually have a chance to be the Republican nominee for president in 2016. So I go back to the Republican model, and looking at their ideal candidate, one name stands out clearly above the rest. It's not Jeb Bush. It's most certainly not Marco Rubio. It sure as hell isn't Rand Paul or Ted Cruz. There's only one name. The embodiment and personification of today's Republican Party, beyond question, is Donald Trump. When you're looking at candidates that fit the GOP mold for a presidential candidate, outside of the paying the dues for years on the Republican side, there is nobody that checks off more boxes than Donald J. Trump. It's not even close. Whereas Bush has the name recognition and the pedigree, and he's worked his way up over the years through the political scene, and he fits a lot of these other check marks. Nobody, and I emphasize again, nobody checks off more of the boxes than Donald Trump, period. And I understand the stigma that comes along with Donald Trump and how some people will view Donald Trump. Many people will view Donald Trump. This is a guy that loves himself with a tremendous ego that only wants to run for president so that way he can rename us the United Trump States of America. And he wants to call it the Trump White House. And it's all about ego for him. And he wants to do it so that way he can rub it in everybody's faces. And a lot of that is probably true. But a lot of people are looking at him as a joke, that he's just doing this for himself and to get his name out there and everything else. They look at his television show like The Apprentice and all of this, and they say, yeah, there is no way in hell that he has a shot in hell. Because as he goes through the primary season, he's going to get exposed, he's going to be proven to be a fluke, and he's going to be eventually shown the door and he will exit stage right. And I completely and totally disagree with that. The scary thing about this 2016 presidential election is that somebody like Donald Trump not only can be taken seriously, he will be taken seriously by those Republican voters, by the GOP primary process. And frankly, based off of what he brings to the table for that party and what that party currently stands for and believes in, he should be taken seriously. And that's a frightening thought. But here it is. You've got a white male over 60 with bad hair who has a minimum, mind you, of moderately ignorant views on race. And it's not just Hispanics. He has a very checkered history when it comes to the blacks, too, which is something that gets the GOP off to no end. He's at least moderately ignorant, and probably more so, very prejudiced and perhaps even racist. Somebody that believes the key to America's future is through protecting businesses, is through corporations, through Wall Street. So his policies and his beliefs in many ways reflect that, as it so often does with those GOP candidates. Tax cuts for big corporations. Let's eliminate this. Let's eliminate that. Let's live in a tax credit fantasy land. Let's do all of this. Let's cut it at the top because that way it's going to trickle down because that always freaking works, right? But here's a guy, again, that isn't afraid to say the crazy off-the-wall things. And this is a guy that will be who he is. So even more so than a Romney or a McCain, who were one type of guy but ran to the far right in their presidential cycles in order to sit there and try to appeal to the base that's dwindling in numbers, not growing. A Donald Trump doesn't have to move anywhere. He's already there. And he stands for so many things that the far right of the Republican Party believes in. And a lot of things that the GOP establishment can get behind as well. Donald Trump is the ideal GOP candidate in 2016. He is also the perfect representation of so many things that are wrong with the modern GOP of today. But if you're going to dismiss him and you think he's a joke, just wait until the debates start happening. He'll have instances where he's going to stick his foot in his mouth. He's going to have instances where he's going to say things and you're saying, shit, that was just racist. And what's going to happen? Because of the way he comes off and the way he will approach those debates and the way that he will have no fear and he will relentlessly attack Obama and his administration and have absolutely no reservations about attacking anybody else on that stage in those debates, he's going to come across very well on those debates. And while people will view him as an arrogant, egotistical man, they will view him as a confident man and as a proud man and somebody that won't back down in the face of the terrorizers. And that's something that plays very well on the GOP side. They're going to look at him as a man of principle, a different type of a modern-day Ronald Reagan, if you will. And he's going to do well. He's going to do very well. You can dismiss Donald J. Trump all you want in this whole election cycle, but you're doing that at your own peril. This is serious. This is very serious. And again, in a lot of ways, he is the perfect GOP candidate because he's loaded with hypocrisies all over the place. This is a guy that will talk about the ills of giving handouts and welfare, talk about the evils of Obamacare and all of these other things, yet all the while has never had any problems filing for corporate bankruptcy to the tune of 4 separate occasions throughout the 90s and the 2000s. This is a guy that's had no problem utilizing the system for his own corporation's benefits to where it might not directly affect his company and his employees, but it most certainly can affect other banks and lenders that loaned him a shit ton of money, and then they're trying to sit there and get back what they can. And he either gets a portion of that debt taken away, or he gets it at a lower interest rate. It's all a game with him. So for a guy that will talk about how much he hates handouts, he has no problem taking them for his corporations himself and has done so throughout his history, which again is so much like the Republican Party would. They don't want subsidies, they don't want government handouts, but will subsidize the oil industry with big-time tax credits and tax breaks. It's the same damn thing, and it is. He will talk about family values, sure. He'll talk about how he's anti-abortion, how he's a God-fearing man, a gun-toting, gun-loving SOB. Yet this is a guy that's on marriage number 3. He basically, for all intents and purposes, is a baby daddy. That's married a couple times. If we're being honest, he has 5 kids with 3 different women. He started messing with wife number 2, Marla, while he was still married to wife number 1, Ivana, excuse me. This man's been married 3 times. So he fits the modern Republican mold of being very hypocritical on family and values types of issues. He will say one thing, yet in his own personal life will do something entirely different. Here's a guy that will preach fiscal responsibility. He will talk about having to sit there and manage our expenses. He'll sit there and talk about having to eliminate the budget deficit and bringing down and trying to eliminate the national debt. Yet he will sit there and argue for what has been proven time and time again to be a failed fiscal policy of supply-side economic tax cuts that have proven to be national debt exploders, not shrinkers. So he'll talk about fiscal responsibility, but he will back some of the most fiscally irresponsible policies in terms of budgetary matters, and especially when it comes to tax cuts, of anybody on that side of the fence, or on any side of the fence, frankly. So in a lot of ways, again, he is the modern GOP. He's almost 70 years of age. He's a white male who says ignorant, dumb shit, that has no problems talking about the good of corporations and the good of Wall Street, has no problems utilizing the system to his corporation's advantage, all the while other people and other companies could get fucked over, and he and his corporations reap the benefits. A guy who will talk about how much he loves God and he believes in family values, and will talk about the lack of family values in other economic and social statuses, yet is on marriage number 3 himself. I mean, let's face it, Trump is a perfect GOP candidate. He absolutely is. And there is a part of me, when I put the fear aside of the fact that he actually could win that nomination, and once he got into a general election, could be a fundraising machine for that side, and perhaps crank out a lot of vote on the far right that wouldn't have maybe been there. And get past that thought, that fear of him potentially having any chance in the world of winning that election in 2016, becoming the next president of the United States. I personally hope that Donald Trump is taken seriously, like I believe he will be. And I ultimately hope he wins the nomination. Because if he does, he will very well go on to the general election and he'll get creamed and he'll get walloped. And he will come to represent the personification of everything that is wrong with the modern Republican Party, and just how far out of touch they are, and how little of a clue they really have, and how exclusive as opposed to inclusive their party actually is. Take Donald Trump's campaign lightly if you want. Treat him as a joke if you must. But he's not to be taken lightly. And his campaign most certainly is not a joke. And when it comes to Republican candidates, he is the least joke out of all of them. Mostly for bad reasons. But again, that makes them legitimate reasons for the Republican Party. The GOP needs to look no farther than Trump Plaza to see their ideal candidate in 2016. And it is Donald Trump.